For
Hi Mahima, how you doing?
very well. How are you?
Really good. And this is actually our first conversation. And you're in Nepal, aren't you?
Yep, I am. I am in Kathmandu in Nepal. Yeah.
Kathmandu, and here I am in London. But yeah, we were having a chat a bit before about leadership.
Hmm.
I was hearing, what you were saying about basically that leadership from within,
Yeah.
capacity we have to check in on ourselves
Hmm.
and use insight, if you like, as a way of navigating. When we say insight, allowing fresh thought, fresh perspectives to come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Well, I mean, I think at the simplest level, the first thing that we want to look at with leaders is what allows them to be their best self, right? What allows them to be insightful, resilient, um, collaborative, inquisitive, decisive, what allows us to do those things in a way that's actually high performance, right? So that's the first thing we want to look at, because I think if a leader understands where their best version is, who is that, right? And who is that version of them that is free of all of their old ideas of themselves and free of all of the personal limitations that we impose on ourselves, right? I'm good at this, not that. I can do this, not that. I like these kinds of people, not that. These kinds of people are difficult, I can't handle them. All of these ideas that we have, which everybody has. The first thing that I want my leaders to understand is, what is that? And is there a life before that? Is there a version of them that is there even when we take out all of our labels about ourselves, right? And next to that is then being able to see that in other people. Is there a version of them that's different from all the labels that I've put on them, based on all my past experience of them, based on what I read in their resume, based on what other people have said about them? um, is there a them beyond all of that? Is there a real person somewhere underneath that's alive and vibrant? Um, because that's where the real power in people is.
Yeah.
If we're able to see beyond these ideas, then we can bring out the best in people. And without that, a leader's job is kind of undone. If a leader doesn't know how to bring out the best in his people, his job is undone.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing what you're saying is that people could seize on, you just want to get the best bits of people. And, traditional thinking is like, well, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? But that's not what you're saying. It's about,
No.
there's that part of us that has this capacity to learn new things, have fresh perspectives, to, if you like, be in a way that we've never been before. And tapping into that source of, I'll say, growth that's within us. So it's not about, it's about getting out the best out of those people based on what I know about them. Well, as a leader, there's a lot I don't know about them because they don't know about themselves. As in, we haven't seen it yet and we haven't experienced it. And the same goes for me.
Yeah. And I think so much of it is context sensitive. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, one of the girls in my leadership class said, well, the thing is that I've had 2 or 3 bad experiences with people before. And so I have a real hard time trusting people. And that really affects the way that I'm able to lead. And it affects me in that I'm not a very good team player. I just can't trust that people will all do their bits. And so I tend to be a bit more forceful, a bit more kind of edgy. So what's the deal with that? What am I supposed to do with that? Right? And the fact is that some people will upset you over your lifetime. Okay. Some people will hurt you. They will betray you. They will upset you. And they're just living their life, doing kind of what they think they need to do for themselves in their life, right? Just like we are. We're trying to do what we think is the best thing that we can do with our life. And that's all other people too. It doesn't necessarily have to do with you if somebody upsets you. It's most often just related to them. It's not related to you, right? But the other thing is that if I bring to the table when I meet you all the 400 ideas that I have about other people, I don't know if you're trustable or not. I have the very worst chance of knowing whether I should trust you or not. Right? Because I'm not seeing you. See, I'm not looking at you. I'm bringing to bear all of this old information so that the Lawrence at the other end of that, I haven't seen him. So I'm in the very worst position to do the exact thing I need to do, which is to make a good judgment call about somebody.
And that's that thing about having that clear mind as a leader.
Yes.
And, you know, and everything you're saying there, bringing in all my knowledge. But that knowledge you could dissect and say, well, you know, this is my understanding of people. There are different kinds of personality. There's a lot of baggage there.
Yes.
That can, and often does, create a complete barrier between, basically, as a leader and working with someone else, whether it's a classroom full of people or a member of my team, it's going to get in the way.
Yes, exactly.
You know, my rhetorical question is that in what way is it actually helpful? Or what does it actually block up and obscure? Well, for me, it's that capacity to connect with that person or that group of people in the moment.
Yeah, and the capacity to see the present moment for what it is. Because if you can't see what's really going on here, you can't respond with the exact thing that it needs because you haven't really looked. You haven't looked to see what's really here. Because if you did look, then you would see whether this particular interaction requires you to be firm or cooperative or gentle or ask about something else that you remember that might be connected. You don't know what it needs from you because you're not listening and you're not really here. So it puts you at a huge disadvantage because you don't really have the correct assessment of what's happening. And particularly as a leader, where so much of your job is dynamic, you're trying to manage people, some of who get along with each other, some don't. You're trying to make difficult decisions. You're trying to decide whether a competitor is really going to go that far or not. You can't do that if you have an inaccurate assessment of what is going on here. And I think that's the biggest drawback with never giving yourself the space to see beyond your own ideas and your own thinking. You don't need to always be in that space where you really are not going to do any analysis. I run a business. I am a consultant. I work in crisis. We do a lot of analysis, a lot of drills. Post-incident, we look at what happened. So this is not an either-or system. This is not a life where we're saying, well, turn off the whole part of your brain that has evolved to keep you alive and get us this far. Just stick to the other part. No, this isn't about that. The point is that we are whole human beings and we have all of this capacity. We have the capacity for fresh thought and we have the powers of memory and assessment and analysis. We have both of those. We forget this other thing sometimes.
Yeah.
We forget that, yeah.
And what you're saying, you know, it's about being able to respond to the moment. Because, you know, for anyone watching this, it's basically that innate capacity for leadership. And as you so eloquently put, basically doing what is required in the moment.
Yes, yes.
And people might think, yeah, but I need to learn these leadership skills. You're saying something completely different.
Yeah, so I'm saying that this is a fundamentally different conversation from whether you need skills or not. So that if somebody said to them, you know, I want to become an endurance athlete, so I've got to go train. This isn't a conversation about you need training or not. This is a conversation about, do human beings breathe? Does everybody need oxygen? This is a more fundamental conversation than the training conversation. So in many ways, you can get training or not, do whatever is required for your life. This is kind of just a different conversation. It doesn't have anything to do with whether I get formally trained as a leader or not. I might or I might not. But the thing we're saying is that all people have intelligence, right? They have a certain way of responding to the world that has gotten them this far. And if we work with them, whether it's at our jobs or in families or there are children, if we know that that exists in them, and we know how to see that in them and how to bring that out in them, the chances are very, very high that all the externals of their life, they will learn to handle that better than if I didn't understand that.
Absolutely, yeah. And what you said there, it's come up before about bringing out the best in people is actually seeing that they do have it. And absolutely 100%, I know they have that capacity.
Yeah, and at the most fundamental level, for me, I just think of it as a kind of intelligence. So this is kind of a more fundamental intelligence than we measure with either IQ or emotional intelligence. This is kind of before all of that. That all alive things, right, have a certain intelligence in them. And that's all we're looking at. How that takes form in a given moment might be different. Like a lot of times in organizations, we'll start solving problems at the top. And with our crisis response training, for example, we find often if we talk to frontline people who are kind of at the bottom of the organizational chart, but they will often have very, very simple solutions. The thing is, nobody ever asks them. And so they're not just going to come up to us and say, hey, you know what, I have this great idea, which I think will solve this whole problem for you. They're never going to do that. Why? Because we don't acknowledge that in them. We don't expect them to do it, and we don't encourage them to do it. And that, all that has meant for us is we just meet them. Instead of just a hi, hello, we might spend 2 minutes extra there and say, so how's it going? Do you notice anything that you think we should be paying attention to? That's it. There's no committee for that. There's no big anything. It just means we talk to people, acknowledging that a solution could come from any level of the organization. And in our personal lives, it's the same thing. Sometimes your kids will do something you really just don't want them to do, or they just won't do something you really want them to do. And at some point, if you just have a conversation with them, a lot of times you will find that they have ideas for how to resolve that problem. And often we have not really checked in. We have assumptions about why they do that behavior. We have not really checked with them. And in leadership, I think assumption is a big deal. We do that all the time. Somebody comes late for 5 days in a row and we assume things about them. And
go on, because assumptions, I think, is the bedrock of a lot of how organizations think they need to function. My personal bugbear at the moment is when people have competency frameworks. This is what's expected of you across the board. Everyone has to not necessarily memorize it, but live by. And I love looking at these, these frameworks, and these are our purpose. It's just words, and I'm interested in burying down. Okay, there's something useful there, but what elements of such top-down ways of managing and leading people gets in the way of people tapping into, I'll just call it common sense.
Sure, yeah.
And so from the top down, there's some assumptions that, to bring out the best in our organization, to create efficiency and effectiveness and, create what we need to create, we need to tell people how to be. Whereas we're turning it on its head and say, people know how to be if you allow them to, but those top down assumptions get bumped up against bottom up assumptions.
Yes.
Particularly if people, and then you can take it, people don't feel valued. So what you said, we're listening to you. And then they say, but that's just lip service. They don't do anything with it. You can see how an organization can just be full of inertia.
Yeah. And just a lot of misunderstanding between people. And I think the important thing too to recognize with all the frameworks is that is also some human beings attempt to understand what's going on with people. right? All of these frameworks that we have for competence, for culture, for talent management, succession planning, all of this is just our effort to understand what the hell is going on here. And because clearly when something is not working in an organization, we can see it's not working. And this is our best attempt to look at that and to fix that, right? So I think that's something that's true of a lot of kind of formal theory and frameworks in management, that it is our best attempt to understand what's going on. Something you said about kind of the top down and the bottom up, we do a conflict class, right? It's a 2-day class and it's entirely on conflict resolution. And one of the first things we look at is listening. And we say that listening is the beginning of peace, right? Unless we're able to hear each other out, we don't know if there's something of value. So I might fiercely disagree with you even after I have heard you, but the problem doesn't lie there. The problem doesn't lie in that two people don't agree on something. The problem lies in what we think that means. And every time I disagree with you over something, I kind of add one more post-it note to your face, you know, and pretty soon I can't see you anymore. I've got all of these assumptions. And so that's one of the things we look at, just being willing to see people afresh and seeing how much that adds to your capacity as a performer and a leader. If you're able to see people for what they are right now, you make better judgment calls about what to do. You make better decisions about how to proceed on something. If there's disciplinary action needed, you make better judgments on what that is going to be. Because ultimately, your job is to still get a good outcome for yourself or your company. And if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter what the action was that you took. You've kind of failed in your job as a leader. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say then, it's a massive generalization, people hide behind their professionalism, their job title, their role within an organization. And on the outside, they say, yeah, but I've got all this leadership training and skills, and it's a set of behaviors. And okay, I'm sure they can be very effective. And yeah, but that human dimension, that inward journey, that thing that connects us all as human beings, when you strip down all those layers, what I'm hearing and what you're saying there is that if people get an insight into what actually bonds us together, and that deep down we've got basically everything in common, we can put back on all those layers later.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think one of the things that's helpful, particularly with the principles framework, is that you understand something that's common to all people, which is that we all work the same way, right? So you and I might have very different backgrounds and culture and religion and ethnicity and gender and all of those things, but we work the same way. Right? So that your laptop and my laptop might be very different, but the way that the pictures form in the screen and the way that the keypad makes stuff appear and the way that the cursor works, at the level of function, it's the same. And you and me are the same too. And I think when we understand that about each other, that's a whole different starting point than looking at personal differences or individual differences. Because this is kind of more fundamental than personality, culture, ethnicity, all of those things. This is at the level of, just like you would say with biology, like brains all work the same way. There might be individual differences, but at the level of function, lungs do what they do in all human beings. Hearts do what they do in all human beings. Brains do what they do. Nerves do what they do. And so at the level of thinking and emotion and how we create our experience of life or how we experience life, we're all the same. And so, like, when you see how you get caught up in something, how you get upset by something, when you see that in yourself, you begin to understand that about other people too. You begin to see yourselves more as equals. So kind of before any of the labels and positioning comes, you realize that a 3-year-old having a tantrum your boss having a bad day, your intern turning up late 5 days in a row, and you snapping at somebody because you were kind of in a hurry and a little bit stressed, is all the same thing. All of it means we are all kind of the same. We all work the same way. And I think that's the big equalizer in life, that it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from or how much you have in your bank. We're the same at that fundamental level. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing with, what we're talking about, understanding how the mind works, how it only works from the inside out, and this inbuilt capacity and intelligence within us all.
Yes.
And the fact that if we see these two principles and facts about how the mind works, how we are all fundamentally the same deep down, life does get easier.
Yes.
When you make it actually, when people ask the question, well, how's this going to help me? It's like, well, by getting to know yourself, by getting to know your mind, you're getting to know humanity.
Yeah, and in a sense, that question of how will this help me is in a sense an unanswerable question. Because until you experience for yourself, there's nothing I can say to you that's going to be of value about how will this help me. Because I don't know how this will help you. Okay, and you don't know either. But I think just the openness to experiencing for yourself, because that's the big difference between just having an intellectual idea of, like you create your experience from the inside, or attitude is everything. You hear a lot of that everywhere. And I think the difference in the theory of that versus an experiential version of that, where you get upset at somebody and then you realize, oh, hang on a second, could that be true, that it's not you, it's me? And until you have a moment where you see for yourself that the outside and the inside are disconnected, they're not related to each other, until you have that, there's nothing I can say to you about benefits that's of any use to you, really.
Absolutely. And when I work with people, I'm always, say there's a week gap, I'm doing some coaching or between training sessions, it's like, well, what do I need to do? And for me, it's about pointing people to everything you're saying, but you've got the feedback mechanism of day-to-day life. Now, if someone wants to journal about that or reflect on it, fantastic. Or it may, I think for me, often that feedback mechanism of life, we, through insight after the fact, we like, I missed it there. As in, I got caught up in my emotions, or actually I responded really well in the moment. As in, I was having the day from hell. A friend last night, actually, my apprentice, she was telling me 3 or 4 things in the office that you just don't want to all happen on the same day happened. And okay, she had one little thing. She was like, yeah, but I don't like this feeling of anxiety. And we went deeper into it. I said, you dealt with the situations. You were a leader in those moments. And it wasn't about staying calm. You were allowed to get a little bit annoyed with the person. You had to deal with the problem. You had to be a bit of a mother to someone who was having a little bit of a crisis. It doesn't matter that you felt a little bit uncomfortable. You didn't run away. You got on with your job. And it was really interesting that she was able to then reflect and say, well, yeah, I did do my job. And any residual sort of anxiety, just, when you've had 10 hours of this, but it's going to fade. It's the system. And as soon as she saw that more deeply, it was like, boom, it's gone. I think often people do, when they do become aware of like, okay, I know I was feeling my thinking, or I know it was my separate reality. I know this. It's like, well, it's more accurate, as Jamie would say, to say you don't in that moment. But it's being okay with being uncomfortable, to not feeling, all peaceful, calm and serene. That's not what we're talking about. There's that roller coaster of human emotion we ride, but we just ride with it. And for me, I've seen it in my own life, just getting on with stuff. As I said to a friend recently, she was trying to kickstart a training program again. She's had a baby, wants to do more fitness kind of thing. She was waiting for some motivation. She was waiting for a feeling. And if someone watching this is like, oh, that project I want to just get on with, I'm just waiting for the time is right, I'm going to do that thing. It's like, well, there's no point waiting, because that feeling is not going to arrive. As in, what you're waiting for as the sign, you're looking in the wrong direction. Maybe that feeling of, I'm not feeling very motivated about this, maybe that's the sign to start taking action. Or to deal with the situation.
Yeah, plus, I mean, what do you think feelings are? When we say that I'm waiting to feel inspired. So what do I think that is? Where do I think inspiration comes from? Do I think it's kind of this random thing that kind of just comes in when it likes? Or do I think that it has something to do with my thinking at the time? Do I think feeling unmotivated is a thing? Like, I feel unmotivated right now, I can't do anything. Is it like a thing, like a factor in my life? Or if not, what is it? If it's not a real solid thing in my life, what is it? Right? And I think as we begin to kind of understand the link between feelings and what we're thinking right now, because that's the other thing, right? A feeling, when we say thoughts create your feelings, it can only do so right now, in this moment, right? Like, where are all your thoughts from yesterday? You can only have a thought right now, and that will affect how you feel right now. And so when I say I feel unmotivated or I feel a bit stuck, if I kind of have forgotten that that means right this hot second, I have a corresponding type of thinking going on, and that thoughts will change. And that it's not a thing that like if you get an injection, it takes a certain number of days for the vaccine to go through your system. It's not a physical thing. It kind of exists just in this intangible vapor thing, which just it's fluid. It can change the next second. So what does that mean for your feeling of stuckness or feeling unmotivated?
Yeah. And I think for anyone who has maybe had a recent experience of just what you're saying, is that more attention we give to those feelings, and the more we start analysing or thinking there's actual substantive meaning,
yes,
that's only going to hold us down or hold us back and prevent that natural flow of fresh thought and experience and perspective to come through, because we're now preoccupied with this feeling and we're attached to it. We've objectified it into something that, wow, this must be important.
Yeah, and that's a sign of something, other than a sign of your thinking about that.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, I like to keep these videos quite short, so that's been a beautiful little conversation. I think we've covered quite a lot of territory, actually, Mahima. So we will carry this on. So just going to say goodbye to anyone who's watching this, and thank you for getting right to the end.
Yeah.
Thank you.